Early on, I think my passion was reading and books, literature in general, and sports as well. As I got into I don't know, my brother was about 5 years older than me, and we shared a room. He had very eclectic tastes. And so I was influenced by that and the music that was in the house, which ran the gamut from jazz. He'd go to the Newport Jazz Festival and Folk Festival, and the music of the 60s, Dylan and the like. And then I guess on my own I developed a love of more avant-garde, contemporary classical and jazz music. And it became slowly into my teens, as it is for many people, just my spiritual bodyguard, for lack of a better word. And I did not play a lot of music as a child. I played guitar for about a year. But my focus was poetry, and I originally went to school to study poetry and English literature and to write. But I realized when I was just about to turn 18, when I heard some friends play who had been just playing for a short time and how reasonably well they played after a few months, I just lit into it, and I started to play guitar. And within a year, I realized that that I could have my greatest spiritual connection, which was to music. And so I just went full tilt from that moment on. I was in a conservatory a year later. I never looked back. I just had a complete dedication to that pursuit, and I was overjoyed. I was joyous about it because it was just so much fun to explore and to be involved in. It had been a dream, I think. Mm-hmm.
Did the notion of film composing, did that ever enter the fray prior to you meeting with Mr. Romero?
It didn't. I was already a film and television fan. And my entire childhood really was made up of exposure to all the arts, which I ingested with with a great alignment. But my brother, who produced Martin, asked me if I'd be interested in scoring George's film, and I, up until that time, I'd never thought about scoring films. I was so involved with what I was doing musically. I was already writing songs and scoring and writing avant-garde, for lack of a better word, classical pieces, and I had an improvisation ensemble that explored the farther reaches of live improvisation. And so I really hadn't thought of it. But when Richard asked me, they didn't have a lot of money for Martin. He said, he told George, my brother's a musician. And he asked me, and I thought, maybe, I don't know. And I just wasn't overly zealous about it. But when he told me it was George, and I remembered that Night of the Living Dead from when I was in college, I said, yes, let's get together. I love that film, and that was the thing that launched me. I'd already been a huge, I already watched a lot of films. And I knew a lot about films in that regard, but I never considered composing until that time. But once I realized that was George, I said, man, yes, let's meet, let's go for it. And then it went on from there.
Well, it's I have to tell you, it's one of I'm a film score fanatic, and it's one of my absolute favorite scores because, first of all, especially for the genre of film it comes from, I mean, it is an incredibly beautiful, haunting score, and it has so many colors between melancholia to the gothic nature of it. And I'm wondering, in devising that score, was there a key to understanding the film or that character that unlocked it for you, particularly?
Yeah. Yes, I think it was in the script. I wrote a lot of the score before I ever saw any footage. And it was because the script was so well written. And I don't know, George and I had an immediate connection. It was really interesting. And we just liked each other. And once he heard some sketches, he didn't know anything about me, but once he heard some sketches, sort of slapped, a couple of guys slapped me on the back. I went out to Pittsburgh with some sketches, and they were all just very excited. We just went, okay, cool, let's do it. So from then on, they just left me alone, and I went back to what ostensibly was a garret, in fact, in Boston, and just hunkered down and really drew a lot out of the script. It was so just beautifully written. It just affected me, and I think that was it. And in terms of the colors and the like, that's just something that I like to do. I think that way. It's changed, of course, but I still do. I like to just grab. It's a delight to arrange and think about coloring.
Is that unusual for you to find that level of inspiration in the script phase without having seen any footage?
Yes, I think it is. In fact, I don't think I read another script that did that for me till recently, actually. And I mean, there's often something in the script if it's well written, and there's a lot to it. But we all know that how things shift so dramatically when they get applied to film, and how even during the course of editing, and a shift here or shift there can really change the tenor of a scene and one's response to it. So the fact that George had a script that so much encapsulated his intent and that character, speaks volumes about him. Really, he was a terrific writer, all around artist. So, no, I don't think I've ever had a script that affected me with that kind of import since.
Tell me about I mean, this might be a strange question, but one of the most effective elements of the score for me is that female vocalist. Tell me about her and working on that.
Yeah, it's a love of mine. I just love the female vocal, and I still do. And and it that was all written out, all her parts, and I got in touch with her recently, Betty Silberman. I hadn't spoken to her in years and years and years, but I found her on Facebook. It was very good for that sort of thing. And we had a nice little chat via email. But it's a natural, I just have a great love of that sound. I love vocal music, and I love singular voices. And even today, I'm writing a new piece now for an art installation that's focused on voices. And it's I don't know more to say about it. It's just it's something that just came out of me and came out of my core, and then I gravitate towards it because of its immediacy, I think.
Did the score has been reissued, and it's commented upon a lot as one of the great. I think one source named it one of the 100 coolest scores ever, and I'm wondering, was that did you get that reaction or that sense immediately, or when did the prominence of that score start to grow, do you think?
You mean in terms of the public, or in terms of my own perception of it?
In terms of the public reception and appreciation of it.
That was interesting. That didn't really start happening. That was a funny my memory of that is it's almost comic. I was working on, I'd been hired to score Ed Harris' Pollock, and I went into this, I was looking for some old jazz records, and I went to a large store in L.A. that it was sort of a warehouse type store. It must have been about 99 or so, I guess. And I walked in, and right in the front of this huge warehouse, amazing store, was the Martin LP, a number of them, and I noticed there was for sale for $50, and I said to the fellow, I said, which was a lot at the time, it wasn't, no one had spoken about. It got really well reviewed when it first came out, and it was on Reserve, but no one had spoken about it a lot since, and so I said, who buys this record? And the fellow told me the Japanese just bought them up like crazy. You couldn't keep them on the shelf as soon as you got when someone bought it. So that was my first exposure to it. Oh, and I guess around the same time there was eBay before the internet was really pervasive. There was I noticed sales of that and my Night Rider scores that were going into like $300 range. And I was like, wow. That's interesting. And so it was like at the time I was like, hey, honey, look, someone's buying this for like 150. No, 200. No, 300. Wow, it's like I was, I didn't, I had no idea. I had no idea. I was so focused on what I was doing. I was always on to the next one and be just as, committed and dedicated as just the way I was. So, yeah. That was really, and then after that, it sort of blocked. Oh, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but was it Level Green? Oh, yes, it was all around the same time, I guess. There was a second release, maybe in the mid-'90s, and a fellow came to me all the way from Ithaca, New York, had a small label, and he wanted to re-release it. So it was all happening around the late 90s, I imagine, mid-late 90s when it began to emerge, and then went on from there, yeah. And now it's had four releases since, I think. Mm-hmm.
Wow. And you've worked with Romero several times. I was just listening to the Bruiser score the other day, another one that I just adore.
Thank you. I like that very much,
Yeah, me too. What do you think it is that clicks between the two of you?
Well, at one point, George, we had a natural, the simple answer is we connected in a lot of ways. We became good friends. We just liked each other a lot. We loved each other, like George wrote in the first thing. We were kind of like brothers. He was wonderful to me. He understood me, and he gave me a lot of leeway in terms of composing. I mean, at one point he told me, I want you to write every one of my scores. And he was serious about it, but the whole business, the business is tricky. I was supposed to do Dawn of the Dead, but then there's a deal with Dario Argento and that, and which is fine, and those sort of things sort of intervened, and we didn't get to do that many more, but we were always wanting to do more. And he'd send me sketches for things and tell me, you should have written the score for this one. and so we just had a very, we were like, we were more than a decade apart. I don't know, I think he recognized I was pretty much of an innocent in terms of the business. I just was so focused on the work. And he was sort of, he had his foot in the commercial door by necessity, and so he saw both sides and sort of rode both sides of the fence, even if he was a maverick, it's in comparison to many people in Hollywood, absolutely. But I think he saw me as more even cloistered and so in terms of my intent, and he embraced that. And we just had an easy time, man. We just, I don't know, I grew up in the 50s, had some influence on me as well, just from watching TV and movies. And we shared some vocabulary and perceptions and just it was a love, really, and I think an mutual appreciation.
Mm-hmm. What interests me too is your jazz background, and a lot of film composers I find have similar backgrounds in jazz, from John Williams to Mark Isham and others that we've spoken to for the series. I'm wondering what it is about that jazz form that is particularly maybe suited or complementary to scoring for film.
I don't know about that's an excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold. That's an interesting question. Really interesting. I have to think if there's anything I can offer you off the top of my head. There's a fluidity that we find in jazz because of improvisation and ability to respond. And there's a history, of course, that even predates us in terms of the 50s and the guys who wrote so much of the great television music. Those guys came almost entirely, not entirely, but a lot. Well, no, Korngold, he was a classical dude. There was a lot of classical dudes, but a lot of the TV guys and the working day guys came out of a jazz background. It's interesting, and I don't really know the answer to that because both. I think what it comes down to in the end is the individual artist and how they respond to things. I mean, my background was pretty eclectic, but that's really all I have to offer you, Jimmy. I'm not sure what the answer is. There's a history there, but there's also that history rooted in a classicism. But some of like Bernard Herrmann, who was an early hero of mine, and part of the reason I thought, you could write really cool film music. His work, although he's a classical composer, there's a jazz element to it. There's a freedom to it. So I think that works well with it's kind of like the bullet. It's kind of like baseball. It's kind of like a punch, a punch in the ring. There's a swift and a deft move that comes through an understanding of the jazz idiom that can be applied to film, I believe.
Yeah. And your collaboration with Ed Harris, you mentioned Pollock. How has that relationship grown for you, and how do you define that collaboration?
Ed, it's an interesting collaboration because we met, on George's film Night Riders and became close friends. We just, again, that's a very different type of relationship than I had with George, but based on a different, a slightly different sensibility, although we all were friends. Ed and I just were close in age, and we just formed a quick bond, and he, too, appreciated me. Early on, I never had I didn't have it wasn't easy for me being in the business. I didn't have a big, I'm so different now, but I had no propensity for the business, no patience for it either. Had little ability to compromise or interest in compromise, which caused problems. And when I was younger, if I wasn't dealing with a person who was, who I respected and who was on the same page with me, I was not capable at that time of really explaining my point of view to people, which caused a certain amount of dissonance. And the reason I'm going into all that is Ed recognized who I was in another way. It just had a tremendous, he just supported my work in a big way. So there's a similarity with that. And between we just had a friendship, which we still do. I heard from him yesterday, and I'm actually I mentioned to you, a short film. I've been making films this year, which is odd. I never thought I'd do that. I made a number of experimental short films, and I'm just completing one that he stars in. So I don't know. The thing with Ed was when we had a long history, performing a little bit together. He asked me to act in some things after Night Riders with him, and we just connected. And but we have some differences in terms of how we perceive and proceed artistically, but there's a tremendous respect there and a mutuality that's based in friendship. Mm-hmm.
Well, you've indulged in film scoring and your own original music and filmmaking, as you've just discussed. But one element of film composing that fascinates me is that you have one sensibility. And obviously, the director has their own sensibility as well about the work. And
right.
If those elements ever clash, do you find that that's productive in producing something that surprises you, that challenges you?
It can. That's a tricky question because it depends on the relationship and the particulars of the relationship, which is hard to define, so quickly to you over the phone. But I have found in the past, I have 2 points of view around that. Absolutely, that if you have a strong creative partner that you respect, that's the key. He or she is just, you respect them, and so. George only ever made my scores better, So if you have that kind of relationship and there's a tension, I think a lot of good can come out of it if you both hold your ground or you compromise appropriately on. But when I have someone who is where I doesn't have a high, to be specific, a director who doesn't want to use the best of me, it's probably not, at least in the past, it wasn't the best situation. And what I mean by that is they have a musical vision which I might find to be lesser than what I consider to be lesser than my musical vision. So in terms of that, capitulating to their vision does not result in a better film and a better, in my opinion. And so that's a place where I'm not uncomfortable with my history, where I didn't compromise in places that I thought were just detrimental. On the other hand, there are places where I could, like in Pollock, where I couldn't much. I should have compromised, and I think we would have come out with a very cool score. So there are places where I was too hard-lined in terms of my approach, and it was not of a benefit. Where I'm at now is just simply working with who I want to work with, and knowing that I want to work with the person, then it's all about the collaboration. And I really open ears, open eyes, open mind. I just don't maintain that kind of position. I think I did earlier on because I just didn't know how to really clearly state my position sometimes to someone who didn't understand it. And that was so imperative in a collaborative medium like film. So it's a long-winded answer. But I guess it's sometimes yes and sometimes no.
No, that's a great answer. So I can direct our listeners to your. You want them directed to your website at donaldrubinstein.com?
Oh, please, they're welcome to visit. Yes, and drop me a line, and that would be terrific.
My last question for you. This is the last question I ask of all my composers. If you were teaching a class in film composition, what are a few composers or specific scores that you would pull examples from, of your own or of anyone else's?
Well, I mean, excuse me, I loved Bernard Herrmann, and that was someone I admired. I also liked Korngold. I mean, I ran the gamut from early on, I listened a lot. I liked that score for Betty Blue. I forget what is his name again. His first score I liked quite a lot. There are a number of scores I liked. I liked adventurous people who love is at the root of the whole thing. You have to totally love what you're doing, and then you just have to be brave. And those are the type of people and the type of situations that I like to be in, where you can reach for the stars with somebody. And so there are so many, but I think, I mentioned Herman Korngold. Leonard Bernstein, man, I mean, he's a similar character to me in certain respects, because he worked in a broad number of mediums and was criticized for that, but was incredibly successful, I believe, in all of them, at least once. He wrote the score to On the Waterfront. I thought that was a fabulous score. But as time went on, I lost interest in scores. I found them just not adventurous enough. Too much capitulation by everybody, and so I lean towards things that are more innovative, that really make my eyes open wide and put a smile on my face. I remember in the early '80s, the fellow, I forget his name now, who was the drummer for the Police. He scored a couple of films I liked too. I thought he had a very adventurous spirit. Do you know who I'm talking about? I mean, he's a well-known guy.
Was it Mark Knopfler or?
No, it wasn't Mark Knopfler. It was Sting, and I forget not Sting was the leader of that group, but whoever not Andrew, some of the other. And then the event, I liked his work. I like John Williams, by the way. I was a fan of. See, I'm not prejudiced in terms of approach. It doesn't have to be. It sounds like I only believe in this radical approach. Not true. I really love anything that's imbued with artistic intent. I remember I paid homage to Williams in a concert piece I wrote back in 1981 to his score for Star Wars, which I loved. So I'm a great admirer of anybody who reaches deep, and somehow, from whatever place they're coming from, they imbue what they offer with a sense of purpose, originality, and beauty, and the like. And I think you can do that from many perspectives. And so those are the things that move me.
Yeah, it's so interesting because, like I said, I'm a real film score fanatic. So, and I miss the great film scores. I think like the last kind of era of really good film scoring was probably the 90s, and now it seems like they're just for the most part just an extension of the sound effects. I don't hear anything thematic or melodic or memorable from scores very often anymore. I kind of miss that tradition. I think that even if I think things got
kind of crunched up there in a lot of ways. I mean, I agree with you, so I don't. And again, I'm not prejudiced. It doesn't have to be. It can be any kind of approach. But I think that there was a hardening of the. I don't know. Things got even more. I don't know the answer as to why, but I hear you, and I tend to agree. And I think that you have to be rooted. In the end, you have to be saying something. To say something, you have to be rooted in history. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I mean, you have to. No matter what medium, what artistic, no matter how abstract I am, in certain areas, there's always content at the base. It has to be something which informs it, And I think that's something which people who don't take the time to learn their craft and to have that type of approach, they lose out. And again, I'm not talking about disparaging any particular type of approach. It can be electronic or this or that. It doesn't matter. Early Jerry Goldsmith, by the way, I liked a lot too. So I don't know, that tradition was so powerful, and maybe it was rooted in another time.
Well, and I actually don't think this is necessarily coming from the composers. I think it's kind of an industry mandate.
Exactly.
They no longer want. Yeah.
Exactly. That's what I was sort of beating around the bush, but that's what. Yes, I think you're right. I mean, it's just this, It's.
I mean, that's why. I'm all for, when I was watching the Oscars, the best moment of the Oscars was seeing Morricone accept his award. I mean, you're talking about a 60-year legacy of adventurous scoring for films, and such.
I mean, how could I forget him? I love his. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to. I was remiss in not mentioning him. I love. Yes, that's beautiful. And I mean, yes. How could you? I mean, what he lent to film. Period. With all that beauty cascading down, film after film. It's just, extraordinary.
Your work is beautiful.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you giving me time to talk a little bit about it.
Jamie, I really enjoyed talking to you. Something about, it's funny, you get interviewed a lot, and something about, I can't even put my finger on it, but we got pretty deep in a short period of time. I think that's because of you. I have a sense of, there's a sense of depth there and dedication that goes beyond this short conversation. So thank you.